Chapter 12 of The Flaw in the Crystal by May Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 12. She woke on Friday morning to a vivid and indestructible certainty of escape. But there had been a condition attached to her deliverance, and it was borne in on her that instead of waiting for the power to force its terms on her, she would do well to be beforehand with it. Friday was Rodney's day, and this time she knew that he would come. His coming, of course, was nothing, but he had told her plainly that he would not go. She must therefore wire to him not to come. In order to do this she had to get up early and walk about a mile to the nearest village. She took the shortest way, which was by the farm bridge and up the slanting path to the far end of the wood. She knew vaguely that once, as she had turned the corner of the wood, there had been horrors, and that the divine beauty of green pastures and still waters had appeared to her as a valley of the shadow of evil, but she had no more memory of what she had seen than of a foul dream 3 nights dead. She went at first uplifted in the joy of her deliverance, drawing into her the light and fragrance of the young morning. Then she remembered Harding Powell. She had noticed as she passed the farmhouse that the blinds were drawn again in all the windows. That was because Harding and Milly were gone. She thought of Harding, of Milly, with an immense tenderness and compassion, but also with lucidity, with sanity. They had gone, yesterday, and she had not seen them. That could not be helped. She had done all that was possible. She could not have seen them as long as the least taint of Harding's malady remained with her. And how could she have faced Milly after having broken her word to her? Not that she regretted even that, the breaking of her word, so sane was she. She could conceive that if it had not been for Rodney Lanyon she might have had the courage to have gone on. She might have considered that she was bound to save Harding, even at the price of her own sanity, since there was her word to Milly. But it might be questioned whether by holding on to him she would have kept it, whether she really could have saved him that way. She was no more than a vehicle, a crystal vessel for the inscrutable and secret power, and in destroying her utterly Harding would have destroyed himself. You could not transmit the power through a broken crystal. Why, not even through one that had a flaw. There had been a flaw somewhere, so much was certain, and as she searched now for the flaw with her luminous sanity, she found it in her fear. She knew, she had always known, the danger of taking fear and the thought of fear with her into that world where to think was to will, and to will was to create. But for the rest she had tried to make herself clear as crystal. And what could she do more than give up Rodney? As she set her face towards the village she was sustained by a sacred ardour, a sacrificial exaltation. But as she turned homewards across the solitary fields she realized the sadness, the desolation of the things she had accomplished. He would not come. Her message would reach him 2 hours before the starting of the train he always came by. Across the village she saw her white house shining, and the windows of his room, her study, which was always his room when he came, its lattices were flung open as if it welcomed him. Something had happened there. Her maid was standing by the garden gate looking for her. As she approached, the girl came over the field to meet her. She had an air of warning her, of preparing her for something. It was Mrs. Powell, the maid said. She had come again. She was in there waiting for Miss Agatha. She wouldn't go away. She had gone straight in. She was in an awful state. The maid thought it was something to do with Mr. Powell. They had not gone then. "If I were you, miss," the maid was saying, "I wouldn't see her." "Of course I shall see her." She went at once into the room where Rodney might have been, where Milly was. Milly rose from the corner where she sat averted. "Agatha," she said, "I had to come." Agatha kissed the white, suppliant face that Milly lifted. "I thought," she said, "you'd gone yesterday." "We couldn't go. He's ill again." "Ill?" "Yes. Didn't you see the blinds down as you passed?" "I thought it was because you'd gone." "It's because that thing's come back again." "When did it come, Milly?" "It's been coming for 3 days." Agatha drew in her breath with a pang. It was just 3 days since she began to let him go. Milly went on. "And now he won't come out of the house. He says he's being hunted. He's afraid of being seen, being found. He's in there, in that room. He'd made me lock him in." They stared at each other and at the horror that their faces took and gave back each to each. "Oh, Aggie," Milly cried it out in her anguish. "You will help him?" "I can't." Agatha heard her voice go dry in her throat. "You can't?" Agatha shook her head. "You mean you haven't, then?" "I haven't. I couldn't." "But you told me you were giving yourself up to it. You said that was why you couldn't see us." "It was why. Do sit down, Milly." They sat down, still staring at each other. Agatha faced the window so that the light ravaged her. Milly went on. "That was why I left you alone. I thought you were going on. You said you wouldn't let him go. You promised me you'd keep on." "I did keep on till—" But Milly had only paused to hold down a sob. Her voice broke out again, clear, harsh, accusing. "What were you doing all that time?" "Of course," said Agatha, "you're bound to think I let you down." "What am I to think?" "Milly, I asked you not to think it was me." "Of course I knew it was the Power, not you. But you had hold of it. You did something. Something that other people can't do. You did it for one night, and that night he was well. You kept on for 6 weeks, and he was well all that time. You leave off for 3 days I know when you left off and he's ill again. And then you tell me that it isn't you. It is you. And if it's you, you can't give him up. You can't stand by, Aggie, and refuse to help him. You know what it was. How can you bear to let him suffer? How can you?" "I can, because I must." "And why must you?" Milly raised her head more in defiance than in supplication. "Because I told you that I might give out. Well, I have given out." "You told me that the Power can't give out, that you've only got to hold on to it, that it's no effort. I'm only asking you, Aggie, to hold on." "You don't know what you're asking." "I'm asking you only to do what you have done, to give 5 minutes in the day to him. You said it was enough, only 5 minutes. It isn't much to ask." Agatha sighed. "What difference could it make to you? 5 minutes." "You don't understand," said Agatha. "I do. I don't ask you to see him or to bother with him. Only to go on as you were doing." "You don't understand. It isn't possible to explain it. I can't go on." "I see. You're tired, Aggie. Well, not now, not to day, but later, when you're rested, won't you?" "Oh, Milly, dear Milly, if I could—" "You can. You will. I know you will." "No. You must understand it. Never again. Never again." "Never?" "Never." There was a long silence. At last Milly's voice crept through, strained and thin, feebly argumentative, the voice of a thing defeated and yet unconvinced. "I don't understand you, Agatha. You say it isn't you. You say you're only a connecting link, that you do nothing, that the Power that does it is inexhaustible, that there's nothing it can't do, nothing that it won't do for us, and yet you go and cut yourself off from it, deliberately, from the thing you believe to be divine." "I haven't cut myself off from it." "You've cut Harding off," said Milly, "if you refuse to hold him." "That wouldn't cut him off from it. But, Milly, holding him was bad. It wasn't safe." "It saved him." "All the same, Milly, it wasn't safe. The thing itself isn't." "The Power? The divine thing?" "Yes. It's divine, and it's terrible. It does terrible things to us." "How could it? If it's divine, wouldn't it be compassionate? Do you suppose it's less compassionate than you are? Why, Agatha, when it's goodness and purity itself." "Goodness and purity are terrible. We don't understand it. It's got its own laws. What you call prayer's all right. It would be safe, I mean. I suppose it might get answered anyway, however we fell short. But this is different. It's the highest, Milly. And if you rush in and make for the highest, can't you see? Oh, can't you see how it might break you? Can't you see what it requires of you? Absolute purity. I told you, Milly. You have to be crystal to it. Crystal without a flaw." "And if there were a flaw?" "The whole thing, don't you see, would break down. It would be no good. In fact, it would be awfully dangerous." "To whom?" "To you. To them. The people you're helping. You make a connection, you smash down all the walls so that you get through to each other, and supposing there was something wrong with you and it doesn't work any longer, the power, I mean, don't you see that you might do harm where you were trying to help? But Agatha, there was nothing wrong with you. How do I know? Can anybody be sure there's nothing wrong with them? You think, said Milly, there was a flaw somewhere. There must have been, somewhere. What was it? Can't you find out? Can't you think? Think! Sometimes I have thought it may have been my fear. Fear? Yes, it's the worst thing. Don't you remember? I told you not to be afraid. But Agatha, you were not afraid. I was, afterwards. I got frightened. You? And you told me not to be afraid, said Milly. I had to tell you. And I wasn't afraid afterwards. I believed in you. He believed in you. You shouldn't have. You shouldn't. That was just it. That was it? I suppose you'll say next it was I who frightened you. As they faced each other there, Agatha, with the terrible, the almost supernatural lucidity she had, saw what was making Milly say that. Milly had been frightened. She felt that she had probably communicated her fright. She knew that that was dangerous, and she knew that if it had done harm to Harding, she and not Agatha would be responsible. And because she couldn't face her responsibility, she was trying to fasten upon Agatha some other fault than fear. No, Milly, I don't say you frightened me. It was my own fear. What was there for you to be afraid of? Agatha was silent. That was what she must never tell her, not even to make her understand. She did not know what Milly was trying to think of her. Milly might think what she liked. But she should never know what her terror had been and her danger. Agatha's silence helped Milly. Nothing will make me believe, she said, that it was your fear that did it. That would never have made you give Harding up. Besides, you were not afraid at first, though you may have been afterwards. Afterwards? It was her own word, but it had as yet no significance for her. After whatever it was you gave him up for. You gave him up for something. I did not. I never gave him up until I was afraid. You gave it up. You wouldn't have done that if there had not been something, something that stood between. If, said Agatha, you could only tell me what it was. I can't tell you. I don't know what came to you. I only know that if I'd had a gift like that, I would not have given it up for anything. I wouldn't have let anything come between. I'd have kept myself. I did keep myself for it. I couldn't keep myself entirely for Harding. There were other things, other people. I couldn't give them up for Harding or for anybody. Are you quite sure you kept yourself what you were, Aggie? What was I? My dear, you were absolutely pure. You said that was the condition. Yes. And don't you see who is absolutely? If you thought I was, you didn't know me. As she spoke, she heard the sharp click of the latch as the garden gate fell to. She had her back to the window so that she saw nothing, but she heard footsteps that she knew, resolute and energetic footsteps that hurried to their end. She felt the red blood surge into her face, and saw that Milly's face was white with another passion, and that Milly's eyes were fixed on the figure of the man who came up the garden path. And without looking at her, Milly answered. I don't know now, but I think I see, my dear. In Milly's pause the doorbell rang violently. Milly rose and let her have it. What was the flaw in the crystal? End of chapter 12. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 13 of The Flaw in the Crystal by May Sinclair. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. Chapter 13. Rodney entered the room, and it was then that Milly looked at her. Milly's face was no longer the face of passion, but of sadness and reproach, almost of recovered incredulity. It questioned rather than accused her. It said, unmistakably, "You gave him up for that?" Agatha's voice recalled her. "Milly, I think you know Mr. Lanyon." Rodney, in acknowledging Milly's presence, did not look at her. He saw nothing there but Agatha's face, which showed him at last the expression that to his eyes had always been latent in it, the look of the tragic, hidden soul of terror that he had divined in her. He saw her at last as he had known he should some day see her. Terror was no longer there, but it had possessed her. It had passed through her and destroyed that other look she had from her lifted mouth and hair, the look of a thing born on wings. Now, with her wings beaten, with her white face and haggard eyes, he saw her as a flying thing tracked down and trampled under the feet of the pursuer. He saw it in one flash as he stood there holding Milly's hand. Milly's face had no significance for him. He didn't see it. When at last he looked at her his eyes questioned her. They demanded an account from her of what he saw. For Agatha, Milly's face, prepared as it was for leave-taking, remained charged with meaning. It refused to divest itself of reproach and of the incredulity that challenged her. Agatha rose to it. "You're not going, Milly, just because he's come. You needn't." Milly was going. He rose to it also. If Mrs. Powell would go like that, in that distressing way, she must at least let him walk back with her. Agatha wouldn't mind. He hadn't seen Mrs. Powell for ages. He had risen to such a height that Milly was bewildered by him. She let him walk back with her to the farm and a little way beyond it. Agatha said good-bye to Milly at the garden gate and watched them go. Then she went up into her own room. He was gone so long that she thought he was never coming back again. She did not want him to come back just yet, but she knew that she was not afraid to see him. It did not occur to her to wonder why, in spite of her message, he had come, nor why he had come by an earlier train than usual. She supposed that he must have started before her message could have reached him. All that, his coming or his not coming, mattered so little now. For now the whole marvellous thing was clear to her. She knew the secret of the gift. She saw luminously, almost transparently, the way it worked. Milly had shown her. Milly knew. Milly had seen. She had put her finger on the flaw. It was not fear. Milly had been right there too. Until the moment when Harding Powell had begun to get at her, Agatha had never known what fear felt like. It was the strain of mortality in her love for Rodney, the hidden thing, unforeseen and unacknowledged, working its work in the darkness. It had been there all the time, undermining her secret sacred places. It had made the first breach through which the fear that was not her fear had entered. She could tell the very moment when it happened. She had blamed poor little Milly, but it was the flaw that had given their deadly point to Milly's interference and Harding's importunity. But for the flaw they could not have penetrated her profound serenity. Her gift might have been trusted to dispose of them. For before that moment the gift had worked indubitably. It had never missed once. She looked back on its wonders, on the healing of herself, the first healing of Rodney and Harding Powell, the healing of Bella. It had worked with a peculiar rhythm of its own, and always in a strict, a measurable proportion to the purity of her intention. To Harding's case she had brought nothing but innocent love and clean compassion. To Bella's, nothing but a selfless and beneficent desire to help. And because in Bella's case at least she had been flawless, out of the three Bella's was the only cure that had lasted. It had most marvellously endured. And because of the flaw in her, she had left Harding worse than she had found him. No wonder that poor Milly had reproached her. It mattered nothing that Milly's reproaches went too far, that in Milly's eyes she stood suspected of material sin. Anything short of the tangible had never been enough for Milly. It mattered nothing that, though Milly mightn't believe it, she had sinned only in her thought. For Agatha, who knew, that was enough, more than enough, it counted more. For thought went wider and deeper than any deed. It was of the very order of the powers intangible wherewith she had worked. Why, thoughts unborn and shapeless that ran under the threshold and hid there, counted more in that world where it, the unuttered, the hidden and the secret, reigned. She knew now that her surrender of last night had been the ultimate deliverance. She was not afraid any more to meet Rodney, for she had been made pure from desire. She was safeguarded forever. He had been gone about an hour when she heard him at the gate again and in the room below. She went down to him. He came forward to meet her as she entered. He closed the door behind them, but her eyes held them apart. "Did you not get my wire?" she said. "Yes, I got it." "Then why did I come? Because I knew what was happening. I wasn't going to leave you here for Powell to terrify you out of your life. Surely you thought they'd gone? I knew they hadn't, or you wouldn't have wired. But I would. I'd have wired in any case. To put me off? To put you off. Why? He questioned without divination or forewarning. The veil of flesh was as yet over his eyes, so that he could not see. Because I didn't mean that you should come, that you should ever come again, Rodney. He smiled. So you went back on me, did you? If you call it going back. She longed for him to see. That was only because you were frightened, he said. He turned from her and paced the room uneasily, as if he saw. Presently he drew up by the hearth and stood there for a moment, puzzling it out, and she thought that he had seen. He hadn't. He faced her with a smile again. But it was no good, dear, was it? As if I wouldn't know what it meant. You wouldn't have done it if you hadn't been ill. You lost your nerve. No wonder, with those Powells preying on you body and soul for weeks. No, Rodney, no. I didn't want you to come back, and I think now it would be better if you didn't stay. It seemed to her now that perhaps he had seen and was fighting what he saw. I'm not going to stay, he said. I am going in another hour to take Powell away somewhere. He took it up where she had made him leave it. Then, Agatha, I shall come back again. I shall come back, let me see, on Sunday. She swept that aside. Where are you going to take him? To a man I know who'll look after him. Oh, Rodney, it'll break Milly's heart. She had come in her agitation to where he stood. She sat on the couch by the corner of the hearth, and he looked down at her there. No, he said, it won't. It'll give him a chance to get all right. I've convinced her it's the only thing to do. He can't be left here for you to look after. Did she tell you? She wouldn't have told me a thing if I hadn't made her. I dragged it out of her bit by bit. Rodney, that was cruel of you. Was it? I don't care. I'd have done it if she bled. What did she tell you? Pretty nearly everything, I imagine. Quite enough for me to see what, between them, they've been doing to you. Did she tell you how he got well? He did not answer all at once. It was as if he drew back before the question, alien and disturbed, shirking the discerned yet unintelligible issue. Did she tell you, Rodney? Agatha repeated. Well, yes, she told me. He seemed to be making reluctantly some admission. He sat down beside her, and his movement had the air of ending the discussion. But he did not look at her. What do you make of it? She said. This time he winced visibly. I don't make anything. If it happened like that, Agatha. It did happen. Well, I admit, it was uncommonly queer. He left it there and reverted to his theme. But it's no wonder. If you sat down to that for 6 weeks, it's no wonder you got scared. It's inconceivable to me how that woman could have let you in for him. She knew what he was. She didn't know what I was doing till it was done. She'd no business to let you go on with it when she did know. Ah, but she knew then that it was all right. All right? Absolutely right. Rodney, she called to him as if she would compel him to see it as it was. I did no more for him than I did for you and Bella. He started. Bella? He repeated. He stared at her. He had seen something. You wondered how she got all right, didn't you? He said nothing. That was how. And still he did not speak. He sat there leaning forward, staring now at his own clasped hands. He looked as if he bowed himself before the irrefutable. And there was you, too, before that. I know, he said then. I can understand that. But why Bella? Because Bella was the only way. She had not followed his thoughts, nor he hers. The only way, he said. To work it, to keep the thing pure. I had to be certain of my motive, and I knew that if I could give Bella back to you, that would prove to me, I mean, that it was pure. But Bella, he said softly, Bella. Powell I can understand, and me. It was clear that he could get over all the rest, but he could not get over Bella. Bella's case convinced him. Bella's case could not be explained away or set aside. Before Bella's case he was baffled, utterly defeated. He faced it with a certain awe. You were right, after all, about Bella, he said at last, and so was I. She didn't care for me, as I told you. But she does care now." She knew it. "That was what I was trying for," she said. "That was what I meant." "You meant it?" "It was the only way. That's why I didn't want you to come back." He sat silent, taking that in. "Don't you see now how it works? You have to be pure crystal. That's why I didn't want you to come back." Obscurely, through the veil of flesh, he saw. "And I am never to come back," he said. "You will not need to come." "You mean you won't want me?" "No, I shall not want you. Because when I did want you, it broke down." He smiled. "I see. When you want me, it breaks down." He rallied for a moment. He made his one last pitiful stand against the supernatural thing that was conquering him. He had risen to go. "And when I want to come, when I long for you, what then?" "Your longing will make no difference." She smiled also, as if she foresaw how it would work, and that soon, very soon, he would cease to long for her. His hand was on the door. He smiled back at her. "I don't want to shake your faith in it," he said. "You can't shake my faith in it." "Still it breaks down. It breaks down," he cried. "Never. You don't understand," she said. "It was the flaw in the crystal." Soon, very soon, he would know it. Already he had shown submission. She had no doubt of the working of the power. Bella remained as a sign that it had once been, and that, given the flawless crystal, it should be again. End of chapter 13. Recording by Expatriate in Bangor, Maine. End of The Flaw in the Crystal by May Sinclair.